Okay. Let's go ahead and get started. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, one God, amen. All right, so week 3 on our study of Joseph. What was our big takeaway from week 1, which is our introduction to Joseph?
A lot of family issues.
A lot of family issues in Joseph's family tree, right? So a lot of like patterns that were handed down through the generations of favoritism, of cutoffs, of deceit, right? So this is all in line, like this is all in the family tree of Joseph. And when we see it play out in kind of the opening scene of Joseph's life, with the dreams, and his brothers getting upset, and then one wanted to kill him, one wanted to sell him, one wanted to rescue, right? So a lot of different things, and we kind of summarize it into family history fuels family feud, right? Family history fuels family feud, and we're challenging ourselves to kind of reflect on our own. Everybody's got family issues going on. There's nobody who's exempt from family issues, but family history fuels like what's happening in the family. And the more we understand our history and patterns that are naturally handed down to us, helps us understand our family, feuds, our family issues, right? And then last week, what was our main focus? Joseph was where? In Potiphar's house, right? So our big theme was the cost of integrity, and it was, it was a lot. But one of the things that we were meditating on throughout is that, when we put ourselves in Joseph's shoes, being, sold by his brother, going down to Egypt, what's going through Joseph's mind? It's like, I want this to be over. I want to go back, right? And we always, like, whenever we're in bad situations, we want something big to overhaul the situation to get me back to, what I know and what I'm comfortable with, right? But what do we often miss when we're looking for something big? Small things. The small things. What are the small things that happen to Joseph?
In the house.
Exactly. In the house, not in the field. So when you buy slaves, like when you Potiphar was like a large man in with respect to Egypt, he had field and he had the home. Joseph easily could have been a slave, given like his different social background, different culture, different belief system, just bought as a slave and said, go work in the field, right? But he was chosen to work in the home, right? And that set him up to work hard, gain Potiphar's trust, and eventually become second to Potiphar in the house. All right. What was the other small thing that happened in Joseph's life? Huh? You're right. So after the whole debacle with Potiphar's wife and Joseph being framed, right? He could have gone to any prison, but he went to Pharaoh's prison, right? So nothing dramatic changed. He was still sold, he was still a slave, and he was still falsely accused. But these things of field or home, any prison or Pharaoh's prison, were big difference, right? And we need to look in our own situations where the overall circumstance doesn't change, but there's always like one little thing that God is doing that if we're attentive to it, we'll pick up on it, right? It doesn't preclude us from doing the hard work that we need to do. In those situations, like Joseph was in the house, but he still had to work hard in order to move on. Joseph was in, the prison, as we're going to see, still has to work. We still have to do the hard work, but God is always kind of there doing these little things to help us. All right. So here we are, week 3. Opening question. What is so difficult about God's silence? When God is silent, what is so difficult about his silence? You don't know what he wants. Okay, so when he's silent, it's hard because you don't know what he wants. Okay? You feel alone and you feel just like left behind. Okay? What's difficult about God's silence?
You don't know, is it you or him? Like, is
Am I deaf or is he? Or is he mute?
no, it's like, is it me who like I'm away from him, like I'm taking a step away from him, or it's him like just being silent for like a reason from like.
Okay, so sometimes not clear, have I moved away from God? Or, or like, I'm just not hearing him well, like I'm not seeing like what he's saying, right? So, good. Sorry, what were you saying?
In that I will not know when the situation will finish.
So it's hard because we don't know, when is the silence gonna be over? That's a tough one. Right. Similar question, but I want us to go just think a little bit more critically about it. Like, we said different things of why God's silence is sometimes hard to deal with, but like, when does it get really hard? And when do you feel like, okay, like somebody's twisting my arm and then they really twist mine, right? When is it like exceptionally hard to bear God's silence?
When you're in deep trouble. Not when you need advice, like when you actually maybe tried all the earthly solutions
Okay,
and it's the only one left technically sometimes, or even when you know that this is the one that's gonna get you there sometimes. And it's still like silence. You don't know what to do. It's struggle.
so like you've tried all these different things and it's been no, fail. You're like, oh, I have to go.
Yeah.
No other choice.
Sometimes.
And now I go, and he's silent, right? Thank you.
That's what I was gonna say. That like, sometimes you do all you can to go to him and it's still nothing.
Ooh, so it's even like, maybe just like modify it, it's like, okay, fine, I've gone through all that. But now I've prayed, I've read the Bible, I've talked to like 4 different priests and 2 bishops, and like nothing else. Right? What else do you want?
I think about the situation didn't get healed from the first trauma to get into another trauma.
Say the beginning part again?
And what is hard about the other situation that he didn't get healed from the first situation
Mhm.
and failed rather to get into another trauma.
So when like, so you're jumping ahead to Joseph, but like when you feel like, okay, there's unresolved hurt from the past, that it's now like it's all compacted, right? And it all adds up, and then God is still saying. Right. Everybody online, were you able to hear us?
Yeah, I couldn't hear the last person, that's all.
No, I tried to recite it again.
Okay.
All right, well, that's good. So we did our recap. Let's jump in. So we are going to start in 39. We're going to cover the last couple of verses and then jump to chapter 40. So who can read 21 through 23 in Genesis 39?
So 21 through 23.
21 through 23. Or 39.
I can read. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy, and he gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever they did there, it was his doing. The keeper of the prison did not look into anything that was under Joseph's authority, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper.
All right, great. So just like make sure we're all in context. These verses come on the heels of when, Potiphar's wife, does this whole thing to frame Joseph, and Potiphar is just in this situation where he's like, really don't believe my wife, I really trust Joseph. And, had Joseph not gained the trust of Potiphar, he would have been killed for sure. Right, but he gained the trust, and so the easiest way out for Potiphar to spare Joseph's life is to send him to prison, right? And that's where we pick up these verses. Now, when you put yourself in Joseph's shoes, like it's easy to feel or to think that when you have dramatic changes, and what I'm calling a dramatic change is I was second to Potiphar and now I'm in prison, right? That's a dramatic change in life. Easy to think that all has been lost, right? So let's kind of go through this exercise of what has Joseph lost from going from Potiphar's, second man to prison. What has he lost?
His place,
All right, so he lost a place of position, right? What else did he lose?
trust,
Okay, trust.
freedom,
He lost freedom.
power,
Power, influence. I mean, second to Potiphar in the house. Okay, reputation. Comfort. Sure. Most from Potiphar's house.
He lost trust.
Okay, lost trust. Okay, so, okay, Joseph clearly lost a lot. And I think any one of us, speak for myself, like in such a dramatic change, you feel like you've lost everything, right? But did he really lose everything? I think in these situations, all isn't totally lost, especially when you go through the trial and maintain your integrity, right? And one of the things we focused on last week was the cost of Joseph's integrity was high, right? The cost of it was his coat, which eventually was used as evidence to frame him. And while everything looked bad externally, internally, Joseph was intact, right? He maintained his integrity, he maintained, his virtues. And in this next, challenge in Joseph's life, he rises to the top. And what we do is we kind of get a picture that he rises faster than what it was in Pharaoh's house, which likely means that, okay, when Joseph was being sent to prison, I would say his reputation kind of preceded him about like how sketchy this, whole accusation was. And I wouldn't be surprised if word of mouth could kind of made it to the innkeeper, to the jail keeper, and said like, okay, he was a good man. Life wasn't so good. This was a bad situation, and so on. So that probably played a part in it. But there's a really nice quote from St. John Chrysostom, which really talks about how integrity and virtues shine regardless of circumstance, right? And I'll read this quote. And it says, just as a pearl reveals its peculiar beauty, even if someone buries it in the mire, so too virtue, wherever you cast it, reveals its characteristic power. Be it in servitude, in prison, in distress, or in prosperity. Right? I'll read it again. It says, just as a pearl reveals its peculiar beauty, even if someone buries it in the mire, so too virtue, wherever you cast it, reveals its characteristic power, be it in servitude, in prison, in distress, or in prosperity. Right? Joseph lost like the circumstance, but he didn't lose himself. And in maintaining himself, maintaining his integrity, adhering to the virtues that are guiding his life, his situation in prison was bad, but it became the best of two. Right? And that is largely due to how he maintained and he governed what was happening on the inside. And all of us can agree probably that everything that happened externally was so much that it can very much so stir what's happening internally. Right? When we feel like wrong, when we feel upset, when we feel like we've been betrayed, so easy to pull out like anger. It's so easy to pull out lies. It's so easy to pull out all these different things to either get back or try and get even or maintain what you're losing. But Joseph didn't do that. He focused on guarding his heart, guarding his integrity and his virtue, and it served him well, right? So all is not lost for Joseph. Let's go to first 3 verses in chapter 40. You can read Genesis 41 through.
It came to pass after these things that the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt offered their lord, the king of Egypt, and Pharaoh was angry with his 2 officers, the chief butler and the chief baker. So he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, prison, the place where Joseph was confined.
No, I just walked them.
Okay. So in these verses, what we see is that there's this continual presence of God, right? In little movements. Big picture, not changing. But what we always want to see with Joseph is these little things, right? So Joseph's still in prison, but how is God moving? Who does he bring? Butler and the baker, right? Who doesn't in prison need a butler and a baker, right? But they're not just any butler and baker. They're Pharaoh's butlers, right? So you can see God moving, small ways, big picture, not so much changing, but small things. Let's read 4 and 6.
And the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, and he served them, so they were in custody for a while. Then the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison, had a dream, both of them, each man's dream in one night, and each man's dream with its own interpretation. And Joseph came into them in the morning and looked at them and saw that they were sad.
So we get this picture that a relationship has been built with these 2 officers, like they're there for some time, and they have common ground. What's the common ground? You know, what happened? Like, who'd you annoy? And Pharaoh. Who'd you annoy? Pharaoh. Who'd you annoy? Potiphar. Right? Right? So common ground. We all upset our bosses. That's why we're here. Right? So the butler and the baker both had a dream in the same night. The dreams were distinct, and they were significant enough to disturb their countenance. Right? We all dream, but everybody like wakes up and you're like, okay, that dream is weird. Right, so that's the situation that we have unfolding right now. Now let's read verses 7 and 8.
So he asked Pharaoh's officers who were with him in the custody of his lord's house, saying, "Why do you look so sad today?" And they said to him, "We have each had a dream, and there's no interpreter of it." So Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell them to me, please."
All right. So it's important because dreams at this time were considered to be revelations from God. Right? When you had a dream and it was significant enough, there was a sense that God was trying to speak to us or to me. And these 2 officers are upset because when they're in the court of Pharaoh, who do they have around them? Different magicians. Right? And if I have a dream, I'm going to go to the magician. Well, great. I'm not in the court. I'm in prison. And, you know, how am I going to get my dream interpreted? So this is why they're upset, right? They know it's significant. God is trying to speak to me, but I have no way of figuring it out. Joseph sees this opportunity to speak truth. Because what it essentially says, like, you know, he sees like what they're saying. He understands why they're upset. But his truth is like, okay, but the interpretation, if God gives you the dream, God holds the interpretation, right? It's not for any magician. And this is again like where, you know, our theme has been like, look at all these small things. And a lot of times, like God presents us with small opportunities to speak truth. Right? God always presents us with small opportunities to speak truth. I mean, many of us would like to be able to convince the CEOs and the upper management of whatever organization we're in to believe what we believe. Right? But how many of us actually get an ear with? We don't. Right? But who do we get an ear with oftentimes? My coworker. You know, person at the water cooler stand. Like when we're grabbing coffee, when we're grabbing lunch with someone. That's oftentimes who I have an opportunity to speak truth to. And if I miss the opportunities to speak truth to that person, right? What are the chances I will seize the opportunity to speak to somebody who is much greater? Right? Greater would be great. You know, if I could get the head honcho and everything else in the organization of work. But we never like start. We start quick. And Joseph sees it, you know, and he capitalizes on this opportunity. He says, God is the one who's doing things. Right? So we need to seize these opportunities like Joseph. So let's look at how he sees them. Right? We're going to read verses 9 through 13.
Then the chief butler told his dream to Joseph, and said to him, Behold, in my dream a vine was before me, and in the vine were 3 branches. It was as though it budded. Its blossoms shot forth, and its clusters brought forth ripe grapes. Then Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. And Joseph said to him, This is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Now within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your place. And you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand according to the former manner, when you were his butler.
All right. So pretty straightforward, right? He has a dream. Joseph interprets a dream, decodes it. Not too much for us to really mold, right? But it's these next 2 verses that are like really the crux of this chapter and the most important in this chapter. All right. So as we read these, like, I want you to be thinking about what's happening with Joseph. 14 and 15. You can read it.
But remember me when it is well with you, and please show kindness to me. Make mention of me to Pharaoh, and give me out to this house. For indeed I was stolen away from the land of the Hebrews, and I also have done nothing here that they should put me into the dungeon.
All right. What does Joseph's response tell us about Joseph? Like, what's happening? Okay. He needs help. Expand on it.
Feels like he's stuck and he needs a way out.
He's not having a good time.
He's not having a good time, right? Fair enough. He's not having a good time. What?
He's down, he feels down.
He's down. Okay.
He feels like injustice, like he's like it was unfair for him to be the president.
Okay.
He does like he feels he doesn't belong to the president.
There's an injustice, a big injustice.
Feels forgotten.
Okay. Feels forgotten.
He wants to go home again.
He wants to go home. Right? I mean, even just look at like the key words in the first verse. Remember me, show kindness to me, make mention of me, get me out. Right? All this in one verse. Right? Forgotten, right? Feels neglected. And like the Lord may not be showing like it's not a far stretch to say like, okay, the Lord doesn't feel like he's being kind to me. Right? Make mention of me because there's silence, happening, and get me out. Right? This is the current state of Joseph. He's struggling. This is quite possibly the lowest point that we see Joseph in. He is really, really struggling.
Does it consider an situation? Can we consider it inadequate to somebody?
Oh, can we consider it a lack of faith to ask somebody's help? Yeah. I mean, I don't want to be like, I always struggle to say like lack of faith. Like all of us are in the process of growing in our faith, right? And Joseph in this time is in a process of growth, and he is learning to trust God, and he is learning to put his, faith in him, But Joseph is also human. And he's like, okay, I've been in Pharaoh's house, I'm now in prison, and God is silent. It's difficult.
There is not a lot of way to ask. That is my question.
You're right, it's a wavering, right? Because he's looking for another way, right? God isn't responding.
Yeah,
I need a
that
different way.
You are not different at first.
Exactly, which, I mean, we do.
Do that.
When God is silent with us, we go searching for other ways. Right? We knock on other people's doors, we ask for other people to be our voice for us. Like we try in so many different ways to solve our situations. Right? And not only is he at this low point where he's really like struggling, and I think to your point earlier, like these life events are just really starting to compound, right? Like, hey, brothers, sold me, was doing well, but then Potiphar's wife did me in, and now like I'm in prison, and now like, okay, these two butlers, like butler and the baker, like at least the butler's gonna make it out. They could toast, but like, the butler's gonna make it out. Like, come on, throw me a boat, right? So it's difficult. It's difficult. And what he's also trying to do in this situation, not only is he expressing like his, current state of remember me and mention me and kindness to me and get me out of here, but he's also trying to find like common ground with the butler. He's like, both of us, like, we're in here for the wrong reason. Isn't that what all inmates do? Like, what are you in here for? I didn't do it, right? This is the conversation, right? But I mean, Joseph has like merit to it. That he really didn't do it, but he's trying to appeal to the butler and to really like have him take up his case, right? And a lot of times that is there when we feel God is.
I wonder if Joseph felt that God was silent in all aspects, because like reading this, he had confidence telling them to give him the dream, knowing that he'd have the interpretation.
Yeah.
So he was still in contact with God in communication. Otherwise, he wouldn't have had that confidence. It seems like maybe it was just this aspect of his life that God was silent on.
Yeah. I mean, just because like I like your point, and we shouldn't look so black and white in these situations of like, no faith. You ask somebody else for help, no faith. No, he has faith, right? We all have faith. But can we waver in some elements? Just because like I'm struggling with God doesn't mean I don't believe in him. No, I believe in him, but I can struggle in the relationship. Right? Even in marriage, like I love my wife, I love my kid, but sometimes like we drive each other nuts. But that's part of like learning to love each other. Right? You kind of take the whole package. And so it's not black and white. Right? Believes in God, but still struggling.
Yeah, I think when someone is in trouble, like he is expecting like God interference in his life, like in a miracle, like he gets him out of the prison, like as of Joseph, like he's thinking, okay, God, like he's gonna send out like an angel, he's gonna get me out of the prison. But like God, sometimes he doesn't like deal with us in like the ways we expect him, like he's. But God at the same time, he sent the butler and the other guy, and like it was God's way, like to get him out of the prison. So sometimes we expect things, but God like has different plans for us.
Absolutely. We always want a big upheaval, like a big change. I see. Give you the right. What does Joseph not do in this situation?
Trust God
I think like he's struggling to.
in that
Okay.
aspect of his life.
Yeah, he's
Yes.
struggling to trust God, like in order to really get a strong sense of his presence, right?
Or his value to everyone that has done him wrong, and he's completely innocent, and he did nothing wrong, and look where he's at. So
Mhm. Okay.
struggling with
Yeah.
Giving God for anything.
Okay. He's not blaming God. Agreed.
Yeah, he's not blaming God. He's not blaming Pharaoh. And he's taking what's going on. You know, it's he's accepting what's happening in a way, but he wants to get out of that.
Mhm. I think it's a big point to realize, like, he is not blaming, like, either God or like Potiphar's wife or his brothers, right? The list is long on who can blame, and like it's a perfect setup for, like, you know, when you read the prophets, and they're like condemnation against like Jerusalem, and it's like 2 chapters of condemnation. Like if I was Joseph, I'd be writing like chapters upon Potiphar's wife and chapters of condemnation upon my, you know, brothers who sold me. He's not doing it, right? He's not doing it. He's not blaming God. He's struggling, okay, but he's not. He keeps his emotions in check, right? He's wrestling with them, but they don't rule his life. They don't rule his life, and they don't prevent him from doing his job, right? When we play out the story, which we will, like, okay, Butler is not going to remember, but he still does his job. He's still faithful to the situation he's in, which is another point for us to really think about. Like when we feel like God's silence, when we feel like frustrated with him, when we're struggling, a lot of times we begin to, you know, falter on our responsibilities. Well, I don't want to work as hard, right? Because the situation stinks. Like, why should I put on all this effort when you're silent? Right? We just start to like try and almost get back at God, saying, well, I'm not going to do like what you want me to do. But Joseph, like, he's struggling, but he's still faithful in his work. He still does a good job managing the prison, right? He doesn't let the emotions like run wild and like send him into, you know, a black pit where he's unable to function, doesn't want to get up, doesn't want to do his work. No, he does his job, right? And he rests. He learns to hold things like intention, right? Frustrated, I'm still going to like be responsible with what God has given me. And God has put me in this prison, better or worse, I'm going to do the job. But I'm still angry, right? At the same time, he does both. And that's important for us to do, right? Any questions or thoughts? You know, we spent a lot of time, but like it's really important to kind of pick apart these 2 verses. All right, and let's look at the baker's dream. We're going to look 16 through 19.
When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was good, he said to Joseph, I also was in my dream, and there were 3 white baskets on my head. In the uppermost basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, and the birds ate them out of the basket on my head. So Joseph answered and said, this is the interpretation of it. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh from you.
Bad dream. You got no commentary on it, right?
It was letting a little bit of sugar coating.
I know, it's like, I don't even know how to comment on this. I like put the verses down. I'm like, we're just going to move on to verse 20 and 22, right? We'll just kind of see how this, you know, plays out. It's just tough noogies for the baker. All right, let's read verses 20 and 22.
Now it came to pass on the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast for all the servants. And he lifted up the head of the chief butler and of the chief baker among his servants. Then he restored the chief butler to his butlership again, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker as Joseph has instructed to them. Yet the chief butler did not remember Joseph, but forgot.
So essentially, we see everything that Joseph like interpreted for them play out, right? But the dagger really comes in verse 23. Yet the chief butler did not remember Joseph, but forgot. Right? It's so common, like that when we feel that God is not responding, God is not helping, and the situation is frustrating, it's very common to put our hope in somebody else. Right? To hope that somebody else will vindicate me, somebody else will take up my cause. And when we do that, we more often than not come up with nothing. Right? Nothing's gonna happen. It's not God's time. Like the chief butler didn't remember. Right? Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously, like God revealed to Joseph about the interpretation of their dreams.
Yeah.
So why God would like reveal that, like, and at the same time it doesn't work out, like eventually, like because if I'm in this situation, I would say, okay, like God is sending me a message, like He's gonna get me out like soon, but then like everything like falls down again. So it's like God gave him hope and He took it back, like at the same time. So like because like if this wouldn't help Joseph, why God at the first place like revealed to him the interpretation of the dreams?
Well, Joseph had a gift of dreams. It was his gift. Like, and we know this even from the beginning of the story of Joseph, where he has these dreams and these interpretations, right? He's able to interpret it. So the gift was there, right? This was Joseph's special.
Oh, okay, I didn't know.
No, it's okay.
I think it still works, but in a different timing as we were talking. So like if that story did not happen, you were not gonna remember him after 2 years,
Mhm.
which is gonna happen next. But I mean, without that part, which is again the small things that happen, he probably would have been still in prison. So I think sometimes we might feel that God gives us hope and takes it away, but He gives us hope, or like He gives us something now, and He want to wait for something or like a change,
Mhm.
and He's gonna throw that hope back in a couple of years or a couple of months when you're ready to actually catch it at the time.
Fair enough. You know, and I think it's a really good point that I don't know if everybody online heard that, but it was, the summary of it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like, it seems like Joseph had hope because of the butler and the baker. And clearly he was kind of putting his hope in the butler, who was going to be restored. But then nothing actually played out. And yes, we're kind of looking at a bird's eye view of the story, knowing that eventually the butler plays a key role in this. But a lot of times, like, God will give us something, give us hope, but then it actually doesn't come to fruition until years later, right? So it's a really good point, but without knowing it, right? I think the hard thing is to keep yourself in the moment of Joseph. And the moment of Joseph is just like, he's crushed, he's looking for a way out, he sees the butler, and the butler comes up, like he puts his kind of, hope in the butler, and it's nothing. And so when you take that like zero response or zero reaction, and you kind of like put it on top of this feeling of like, but I've done nothing wrong to be here, right? It just like it's worse. It's like his soul gone. Okay. So, Joseph is struggling, right? But he's not breaking them. He's not breaking them. And to your point, Matt, which is really good, there's a continuation of the quote from St. John Chrysostom that I heard earlier, right, is this. He realized that the race was longer for him, he being Joseph, right? So that by striving consistently, he might win a glorious crown. Joseph, you see, had to await the right moment for release from there to come his way along with renown, like, or to come his way with, the appropriate, renown is a way of saying reputation, right? But to say like God is moving things, right? But not right now. Like he's putting things in. So if we kind of, now that we've finished, chapter 4, I think there's a couple things. Like, would you say, I have two questions. Would you say that God was silent?
I would say no. Say yes and no, because we know this story. from A to Z, so it's probably like a no.
That's all
But
right.
again, like as you were saying, like if you're in his shoes, you we don't notice the small things. Like he
Okay.
is working, but we don't see it.
Okay, well, let me pose a different question. Would you say God was still?
I didn't hear the last part. What was it?
So I have two questions. Would you say that God is silent? Or would you say that God is still?
I mean, I don't think he's still, he brought the butler and Baker to him, like there were things happening around him and he worked through Joseph during the time he was most down. So he wasn't still, like there was stuff happening like around him and through him.
Okay, I agree. I'd argue with you. God was very active in the life of Joseph, right? He was sold, he wasn't killed. He was in the house and not the field. He was in the king's prison and not just any prison. He was the overseer of Pharaoh's officer, and he was given the gift of interpreting dreams. I don't think God was still. But I would argue that God was silent. Right? And who's wavering? Joseph? God is challenging Joseph to grow in this. I agree. Like,
Maybe, yeah, maybe he's just like by everything that happened to him is distracting him from God's plan for him. Like maybe there's like all these things good happening to other people that may or may not be deserving of it. And him in his situation might think, but like, it's not fair. So
I mean,
it could be just
I think Joseph had a lot to feel like.
God's, yeah, God's
know,
plan for
everything
him
is
and
there.
noticing all these small things.
Yeah.
And they-
Oh.
Okay. If I were, uh-huh.
I think it's reminding me of the merger experience with the man who crossed the man.
Yeah.
So,
Actually, one of the Psalms that we read in the 12th hour says, the Lord does not delight in the legs of man, but in, kind of paraphrasing, but in those who trust in the Lord. Right? And it kind of, I know there's other verses that like similar to what you're saying, like curse the man who trusts in man. And that Psalm is also capturing that idea. And you're right, Joseph was putting his hope in the bubble, right? But it came up with it. But I think, like to kind of wrap it up, give you this one phrase that I always think of, and I read it out of a book called How to Handle Adversity by Charles Stanley. I believe. And he said, God may be silent, but he is never still. God is silent, but never still. And it always, like, for me, it always helps me to remember, like, okay, I may not be able to hear him, but he is putting things, he is orchestrating things, he's moving like pieces into the right place, right? He was not still with Joseph, but he was not clearly communicating. Every time Joseph was in the situation, it just seemed like it got bad to worse and so on. But even all that, like he was doing little things, he was silent, but he wasn't still. It's important to remember in our own lives, like God may be silent, but he is not still. And he is moving us, he's moving other people. He is somehow like connecting all our lives in such like a masterful way. Right? He's not still. He's not still. And we have to wait for his plan to unfold. And at this time in Joseph's life, how old was he when he was sold? 17. Right about now, he's 28 years old. Right? So 11 years into the story of Joseph. Right? Think about trying to take all this in over 28 minutes. Well, it's difficult. And he's gonna spend another 2 more years in this, waiting for the next. Right? God is silent, but never still. You're done. Any questions? Any questions or comments on that?
I had a comment.
Yeah.
I don't know, I don't think Joseph actually, I don't know, put his hope in that, I don't know. Or lost faith in God through the whole time. But this is my gut feeling. I think maybe reasons to back that up is because, like, he's still going, like, he still had like his emotions together. He was still like pushing through, and he was like, I guess, what was it, like the head of the prison or not the head? Like
Yeah, it was, yeah, even says that the head of the prison put everything under Joseph's control. Right?
Yeah, and then like even when the butler went out to the king and then he was forgotten, he wasn't like, it didn't say anything about him being mad or upset. Like if you actually put your trust in someone and then they failed you, then you naturally are upset because they failed you. But like I don't think he put his trust in him. I think he just felt like, okay, maybe now is the time that God is good. Like this is the time that God is going to save me through this guy. So like, okay, I'm gonna seize the opportunity. I'm gonna let God work through it. But I don't think he actually ever put trust in, because he still kept going like all through it, and then after the butler. And like Amir said, he was like, he was like listening to God's voice and still interpreting dreams. It's not like he was a bum in prison.
I totally agree with what you're saying. Like, yeah, he didn't lose faith. But did he hope that the butler was going to be the way? Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not. Could he have seen that? Like, okay, well, maybe God is working through the butler. Very possible. Yeah. Very possible. Like, but to your point, yeah, I don't think we can conclude that like Joseph lost faith or didn't trust God. But it is like fair to say, okay, did he hope in the butler? Yes.
And he
Could
was
have
right.
seen- what?
And he was right. The butler did come through for him just later than he
Just
had.
later, right?
So he did work for him.
Yeah. But it like, I know we know the story, but like, it's very different to have the dream come from Pharaoh. And then the butler remember, versus the butler just going and being like, by the way, this is a really good guy that you should probably have in your court. Right? Those are like 2 totally different ways of bringing Joseph to the forefront. Right? Yeah, good points. Good points.
I want to add to what George said. I think he may be like distracted by all the things that's been happening around him. That maybe he just let him use like the people around him to get him out of that situation. But again, like I agree with George. I don't think he did lose faith. I think he was trying to, in a sense, like find a way out of it, or just like find the answers, because God was so silent about everything that has happened in his life last now. Yeah, I feel like just too much was happening. I mean, we're all human. It gets to us all the time. So
absolutely.
Yeah, and it seemed like he was waiting. Like he knew that he would be like saved from prison. Like he was waiting, and he thought like this was the moment, but he just didn't know when.
It's very like, I think that's right, because even when you think of what started this, it was the dream that he would rise to power, right? And could it have been in Potiphar's house? Yes, but God had a bigger thing, right? So there's still that like, ruminating and thinking about like, these dreams I had when I was 17, like when are they gonna like come to be? Like, you know, so I'm sure that's like I would guess it's a part of what's fueling him to keep going. Right.
The moment the story is Esther, and then
Uh-huh.
you are able to the king, but at the moment he wasn't rewarded. But later time, that span, his work was mentioning on the. Yeah,
It was written, it was recorded, right? Very good.
it was rewarded at the right time.
Yeah. Absolutely. Cool. All right, let's pray. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, and we thank you, Lord, for this day. This opportunity to come and to dive into scripture and to grow from one another. We thank you, Lord, for the input of everyone here. We're aiming, Lord, to draw closer to you and in our own lives, Lord. Though it may seem that you are silent, you are truly never still. You are working and giving us small opportunities and opening up different doors. And ask that you would give us all strength and endurance to remain faithful, to seize the opportunities, to see how you work in the little ways, see your hand guiding us in that process, Lord. And may we be courageous to seize the opportunities, to work on them, to not lose heart. For truly, Lord, you never leave us behind. You're always faithful to us. So help us in our own unique walks through the intercessions of our saints who have reached from the beginning. Here, so to say, our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. On earth
Yours in heaven, give us this day daily bread. It's our trespasses. We forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Through Christ Jesus our Lord.